Welcome to Haunted History Chronicles, the podcast where we unravel the mysteries of the past, one ghostly tale at a time. I'm your host, Michelle, and I'm thrilled to be your guide on this eerie journey through the pages of history. Picture this, a realm where the supernatural intertwines with the annals of time, where the echoes of the past reverberate through haunted corridors and forgotten landscapes. That's the realm we invite you to explore with us. Each episode will unearth stories, long-buried secrets, dark folklore, tales of the macabre, and discuss parapsychology topics. From ancient legends to more recent enigmas, we're delving deep into locations and accounts all around the globe, with guests joining me along the way. But this podcast is also about building a community of curious minds like you. Join the podcast on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, to share your own ghostly encounters, theories, and historical curiosities. Feel free to share with friends and family. The links are conveniently placed in the description for easy access. So whether you're a history buff with a taste for the supernatural, or a paranormal enthusiast with a thirst for knowledge, Haunted History Chronicles is your passport to the other side. Get ready for a ride through the corridors of time, where history and the supernatural converge, because every ghost has a story, and every story has a history. And now, let's introduce today's podcast, or guest. Welcome to another episode of Haunted History Chronicles. Today we delve into the life of a figure whose name may not be on the tip of your tongue, but whose impact on the world of spiritualism was nothing short of profound. Our focus today is Maurice Barbanell, a man who dedicated 61 years to the world of spiritualism. He wasn't just a medium, he was a trailblazer, a public speaker, a writer, and the editor behind one of the most influential spiritualist publications of the 20th century. From his fervent public discourses to his contentious debates and his deep connection with the spirit world through his guide, Silver Birch, Barbanell's journey is a story of dedication, conflict, and legacy. But why, you may ask, is Maurice Barbanell's name often overlooked in contemporary discussions, even as the teachings of his spirit guide, Silver Birch, continue to resonate within spiritualist circles? To help us navigate through Barbanell's intriguing life and his lasting impact is Dr. Nick Richbell, a recent PhD graduate in history from the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada. His doctoral dissertation brings Maurice Barbanell's narrative back into the spotlight, presenting him as the 20th century's leading advocate for the spiritualist religion and movement. His meticulous research is shedding new light on this almost forgotten figure, reasserting his place in the history of spiritualism. In today's episode, we'll explore Barbanell's rise as a prominent spiritualist, his role as the editor of Psychic News, his mediumship, and his enduring legacy through the teachings of Silver Birch. We'll also dive into the conflicts he faced, both within the spiritualist community and from external skeptics, and how he navigated these challenges to become a key propagandist for the spiritualist movement. So, dim the lights, settle into your seat, and prepare to journey with us into the past as we uncover the haunted history of Maurice Barbanell with my special guest, Dr. Nick Richbell. Hi Nick, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Hi Michelle, thanks for having me.
Do you want to start by just introducing yourself to the listeners and sharing a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Nick Richbell. I'm an archivist and historian. So archivist by profession, I'm a head of special collections at Clemson University in South Carolina. Before coming here, I was head of archives at the University of Waterloo in Ontario. And while there, working in that archive, I became interested in history and spiritualism, as we had some spiritualism collections based on seances that took place in southwest Ontario. So I decided to actually do a PhD in history on the subject we're going to talk about today, Maurice Barbanell and his spirit guide, Silver Birch. I think it's been a fascinating journey to get this point, and I'm pleased to have this platform with you to talk about Maurice Barbanell and his life and career.
So, do you want to just help set the scene a little bit about Maurice Barbanell's life and maybe take us back to his early life and his upbringing in East London to tell us more about him?
Sure. So Maurice was born Morris, Moris. He changed his name to Maurice probably in his 20s. He was born on May the 3rd, 1902, in Mile End, East London. His parents came from Eastern Europe. His dad, Manel, was born in Russia, and his mother, Rivka, later known as Rachel, was born in Warsaw, Poland. So Manel emigrated to London in 1900, and Rachel followed him a year later in 1901. She stayed behind for a year, looking after their two eldest children, Sophie and Sammy, who were born there. And then obviously she followed her husband. I imagine they were fleeing the pogroms of Eastern Europe and how difficult it was to live there at that time, and with hoping to start a better life in London. Of course, London at that time for immigrants was not a great place to be either. They, lived in, a two-room apartment, I guess we can call it, in the East End of London, and there were six children in all. Morris was the third, as I said, followed by Sarah, Esther, and Annie was the youngest one, all born in London. His dad, Manel, was what was called a master hairdresser, likely working from the home. So you can imagine in a two-room apartment, there wasn't much room for eight people to live and work. So it must have been very uncomfortable, I would imagine. At one point, it's reported that Maurice told someone that they had bed bugs, and at night they would have to use wet bars of soap to kind of get rid of the bed bugs before they went to bed. So that kind of gives you an idea of how difficult it was living at that time. I learnt that his mum, Rivka, Rachel, in Eastern Europe, owned maybe a millinery factory. So she was, likely quite well off before she came to England, and then their circumstances were quite different. Although, they weren't poor by any means, but they weren't living in the best conditions. They did eventually move into a four-room apartment, so doubled their space, but still a family of eight that would have been quite tight for them. So, I know not much is known about Maurice's childhood because later on in life, as he turned to spiritualism, um, he lost contact with his family. I did get to interview Leslie Brooks, who is Maurice's niece. Her mum was Annie Barbanell, the youngest child. And she said she never got to meet Maurice. And they believe that, as he found spiritualism, his mother, who was devoutly Jewish, likely, turned her back on her son at that time.
So, just kind of touching upon something that you just kind of referenced there in terms of his mother's religion, how would you say his parents' differing beliefs influenced his views on spirituality and religion?
I think they greatly influenced him. So, as I said, Rachel, she was devoutly Jewish. She kept a Jewish home. And Manel, Maurice's dad, was an atheist. So you can imagine the conversations that went on in that house between mum and dad about religion. I think they had probably heated arguments even about it. So Maurice was growing up in this environment, hearing these discussions between his parents, and he, did later on in life say that he followed his dad's beliefs more than his mum. He never shied away from his Jewish origins. He was very proud of them. He actually lived in several different areas of London known for the Jewish populations, including Finchley and Golders Green. But I think and this is where, as we'll talk about this further, his, penchant for arguing, if you like, with people or, having disputes probably was formed at this early age in the home.
So, what led Maurice to attend his first séance, and how did that experience shape his view of spiritualism?
So this is probably my favorite piece about Maurice's life, if you like. So around the age of 18 in 1920, he was the secretary of the Ghetto Social and Literary Club in London. And his job as a secretary was to go up into a debate with someone and to always hold the opposing view, in contrast to the invited speaker. And then in 1920, the speaker was there to talk about spiritualism. And for whatever reason, Maurice Barbanell felt that he could not participate in this debate because he did not know enough about spiritualism. So he cut, to the upset of his friends, if you like, in the club, he just would not go into the debate. The speaker invited Maurice to join him in a seance so he could start and challenged him to investigate spiritualism. Maurice wrote that he would give himself 6 months to investigate spiritualism so he could engage in this debate. And this 6 months turned into 61 years. And then, as I said, this speaker invited him to a seance in East London. So this was when his first experience of firsthand of spiritualism.
So, can you describe the moment when Maurice first experienced mediumship and how Silver Birch began communicating through him?
Sure. So the first time, this first seance he went to, he found it laughable. He actually said he laughed out loud during the seance. He couldn't believe what he was seeing and hearing. So this was in the home of Ethel and Tobias Blaustein, also immigrants from Eastern Europe and very prominent Jewish spiritualists in the community. They founded several Jewish spiritualist organizations. Ethel was the medium, and she was known to speak in different languages, those that she would not have been familiar with in her everyday life. And, so Maurice found this, hilarious, as he wrote. He went back a second time, maybe the week later, and during this seance, he fell asleep. He actually didn't fall asleep. He went into a trance. So this was when Silver Birch decided it was time to start working with his channel, Maurice. And when he woke up, he was embarrassed. He apologized for falling asleep. Then he was told, no, you were in a trance. And now you were going to continue with this work going forward now that your spirit guide has come through. So this was the first time that Silver Birch appeared with Barbanell, even though, as Silver Birch has said later on, he always knew he would be working with Maurice Barbanell, even from the point of Maurice's conception back in 1901-02. So he was destined to do this work.
And something that you touched upon, and I think that's resonated in some of the statements that you've made about Maurice's life, this kind of environment that he grew up in around discourse and discussion and debate and people having different opinions, and then his involvement obviously in groups like you mentioned, the Ghetto Social and the Literary Club. How did those contribute, do you think, to his development as a public speaker? And an adversary, as you've already touched upon, that kind of comes through in terms of all aspects of his life through those 61 years as he's involved in spiritualism.
So I think if Maurice was around today, we would, label him a nerd, like so many of us are who are fascinated with one particular area of life. So I think, Maurice grew up a learned child. I think, he read about world religions. And again, this is something that Silver Birch is said to have influenced him as he was growing into his teen years before they started working together. But there's no doubt whether it was his parents arguing in the home or the debate club, this was just the perfect kind of breeding ground for Maurice Barbanell for the 61-year career he had. That a lot of times, especially in the 1930s, as we'll look at, he was adversarial at best and antagonistic at best of people around him and those who he felt were doing a disservice to spiritualism.
I think you used a really appropriate word for him, though, that, he was a learned man. And you could see that about the fact that his role was to be always arguing one position in these debates. But he didn't feel he could do that when it came to spiritualism because he didn't know enough about it. So rather than, giving in completely and dismissing it and just never coming back to that topic, his approach was, well, I'm going to go and find out more about that. And I think that speaks volumes about his character and this very open mind and just desire to know and to learn things. I think that says a lot about him.
It does. You're right, and he, even though he was strong in his beliefs, he was always welcoming of those who opposed him. He liked that challenge. I think he wanted to educate people about spiritualism. He wanted to have this platform, whatever that took, whether it was a propaganda tour or psychic news. He would often print people who didn't agree with him. So it wasn't as if he was always believed he was right all the time, but he welcomed the challenge of these debates.
And you touched upon something just then that I think, again, is also important, which is his role in psychic news and, sharing of information, again, just very much demonstrating the learned man that he was and interested in sharing information, being open to new information and having a space to kind of bring that to people's attention. But there's been some confusion around how Psychic News was founded. Do you want to help clear that up and go on to explain what inspired Maurice to found Psychic News in 1932? And then, what were some of the challenges he faced in those early days?
Of course. So founding Psychic News, according to Maurice, was the biggest decision of his life that he ever took. So the confusion is that a lot of people believe wrongly that J. Arthur Findlay was involved in the founding of Psychic News. He wasn't. Findlay's Wikipedia page, of course, is incorrect to this point as well, but Wikipedia is not often supportive of anything related to spiritualism. That's a whole nother podcast we can go into there. So basically what happened was Maurice Barbanell was a director of some companies, of which I've never been able to find out what companies he was a director of, but he was failing. It was the 1930s, early on. The Depression was happening. Life wasn't easy for anyone. So he had to wrap up these businesses. And he was working with a gentleman called J.M. Rubens, who was helping to wrap up the accounts for these failed businesses. He suggested to Maurice Barbanell and Hanan Swaffer. So Hanan Swaffer is or was a famous drama critic and journalist and spiritualist himself, and he became friendly with Barbanell, and they'd done a lot of propaganda tours during the 1920s. And Rubens suggested to these fellows that they should consider providing some editorial support to a psychic publication that was being considered. Nothing came of that. And Maurice Barbanell likely thought nothing of it. Then he turned to Maurice and suggested he actually start his own psychic newspaper. Of course, Maurice Barbanell was not a journalist, and he had great reservations about entering into this domain. So he, of course, as a spiritualist, turned to his medium friends. So he had some sittings, and during one of them with Alfred Vout Peters, W.T. Steed came through and was interested in Maurice Barbanell pursuing creating a psychic newspaper. And Steed was a journalist himself, and he perished on the Titanic, and then published some posthumous books, if you like, after his passing. But he was urging Barbanell to go down this road. He said that Barbanell had journalistic urges in his fingers, and he needed to cultivate his writing powers. And he saw him working with Hanan Swaffer on doing this. That was not enough for Maurice Barbanell, so he then turned to his friend Estelle Roberts, a very well-known medium of her time. Roberts was known to give huge performances or demonstrations of mediumship at the Royal Albert Hall, for example, and she worked with a spirit guide called Red Cloud. Now, Red Cloud told Barbanell that these plans were already made and that he would be going forward to do bigger work. So really, Barbanell had no choice. That this was what was going to happen in his life. Then, again, needing yet more confirmation that this was going to happen, Maurice Barbanell found an unknown medium called Kathleen Burkle, who worked with a spirit guide called White Hawk. Again, White Hawk told Barbanell that everything was ready for a psychic newspaper to be published, and then the rest is history. So really, the founding was with 3 or 4 dead men, and not with J. Arthur Findlay.
So, what were some of the challenges that he faced during those early days, if you like?
Sure. So, I mean, the biggest challenge was finance. There was getting the money together to start publishing psychic news. Barbanell was a failed businessman, didn't have much money. So between Rubens, Swaffer, and Barbanell, they were each going to contribute the same amount of money, about 600 or so pounds, to get psychic news going. Swaffer suddenly decided not to do that because he did not want people to think he was earning money from spiritualism. So he withdrew his financial support. So Maurice Barbanell ended up borrowing money from a friend to get the newspaper started. So they did, but for the first little bit of time, finances were tough, and this is when J. Arthur Findlay comes into the story. Maurice Barbanell wrote to Findlay asking if he would contribute an article to the newspaper. Findlay had recently published On the Edge of the Etheric, a book about his own journey through spiritualism with the medium John Sloan, and that book was incredibly successful and republished many times over the course of a couple of years. So Findlay came on board and provided thousands of pounds of financial support, and he founded the Psychic Press alongside Barbanell as well. So they were the main challenges at the beginning was financial.
And just for anyone who's unclear as to, maybe what the psychic news was, do you want to just share maybe some of the mission statements, if you like? What was its purpose, would you say, in a quick summation? What was the aim behind it?
Psychic news was really to bring light on, psychic stuff, if you like. So Maurice Barbanell was known, spiritualism is about, really at its heart, is communicating with the dead and bringing forward messages from those who passed over to the other side. And so psychic news was really this platform to tell stories about psychic events and, phenomena. And, we could talk, Helen Duncan would have appeared in it, for example. And their very first issue in 1932 was a challenge to the Daily Mail, who had, the press was supportive of spiritualism, say in the 1920s, and then come the 1930s, the tide was turning. And the Daily Mail in particular had published an article about a medium called Muriel Morris and her spirit guide called Power, and how she was fraudulent. And this became a huge legal case between her and the newspaper. And so this was a great platform for Maurice Barbanell to start speaking out against these people who were against spiritualism, and even those who were involved in spiritualism but were fraudulent themselves.
And he was obviously involved for quite some time. Do you want to just explain the circumstances that led to him leaving Psychic News in 1946 and then, obviously coming back in 1962?
Sure. So about 1945, Barbanell had realized, he was going to get old, and so was Arthur Findlay. And Findlay being a bit older than him, Barbanell was concerned what would happen if Findlay dies to the shares that were created in the companies that they were leading together. So he wanted Arthur Findlay to donate his shares to either himself or to the newspaper, so they could ensure that they could keep publishing after the death of one of them. Arthur Findlay was not interested in doing this. He was already planning to leave his home, which is now the Arthur Findlay College, to the Spiritualist National Union, so it could be a training camp for mediums. And he, said to Barbanell, well, if you can come up with £8,000 within the week, then I will sell my shares to you. Barbanell, couldn't come up with that money in a week and didn't feel he should, so instead he gave his resignation into the newspaper. He served his 1 year notice so they could find a new editor, and so he left, and it was a very, in the middle of the paper, the announcement was a couple of sentences saying, as of this date, Maurice Barbanell is no longer editor, and has been handed over to Stuart Martin to edit. But Barbanell didn't give up working in journalism. He went on to edit the Two Worlds, which was the rival psychic newspaper of its day, which started publishing in the late 1800s by Emma Harding, Britain. And then he did return in 1962. I'm not really sure what happened in that year because Findlay, he passed away in 1964. So something must have shifted. But he said when he returned to Psychic News, it wasn't in the condition, the good condition he left it in 1946. It was in a rundown office. Finances were bad. But again, thanks to the intervention of the spirit world, he was able to turn it around.
And you've obviously spoken a little bit about Arthur Findlay. Do you want to just go into the nature of the relationship between Maurice and Arthur Findlay and how that really did kind of influence what happened at Psychic News?
So I think at the beginning they must have been good friends, or at least good businessmen, colleagues, if you like, because Findlay was with them for many years and gave a lot of money to keep Psychic News afloat. So it is kind of sad that they did fall out over these shares in 1945-46. And Arthur Findlay apparently didn't have any ill will towards Maurice Barbanell, because in his autobiography he didn't have anything bad to say about Barbanell. It was just a business decision, I think, that led them to part ways as they did in 46.
And how would you say Barbanell's role as editor of Two Worlds kind of complemented his work with Psychic News?
So I think that's an interesting question. I'm not sure if complement is right here, because they were rival newspapers. They did in, I think, 2018 kind of become one. So Two Worlds got absorbed into Psychic News, if you like. And I think what's interesting during this period, because it was around 1957 that Maurice Barbanell came out, if you like, as the medium for Silver Birch, who had been published since 1935 in Psychic News, in his teachings. So he revealed a huge secret, but not in Psychic News, his beloved psychic newspaper, but it was in this rival paper that he did this monumental announcement about this that people didn't know what was the case.
And obviously we've touched upon how he loved to engage in public discourse and discussions and arguments with people. What would you say were some of his significant public battles in support of spiritualism? Who were those figures that he went up against? I'm thinking, people like Harry Price and, the Church of England. I don't think there was anyone he wasn't prepared to battle with in terms of differing opinions, really, was there?
There wasn't, and this is what I love about Maurice Barbanell. So I'll just say, as an archivist, I work with many papers of many people who are no longer with us, and you develop this kind of relationship with them. And throughout writing my dissertation, I feel like I've developed this relationship with Maurice Barbanell as well. And no, you're right, Michelle, he would speak out about anyone. It didn't matter who you were, as long as, he felt he was strong in his conviction and that he was not even necessarily right, that's not the right word, but what he was saying what he believed in, then he would. So Harry Price, of course. So Harry Price, as people know, was quite a infamous, if you like, debunker of psychic phenomena, especially physical phenomena. He was probably the most vocal opponent of Helen Duncan, accusing her from having two stomachs in when she produced ectoplasm, to regurgitating cheesecloth. That's where those accusations came from. So Harry Price. So if we go back to when Maurice Barbanell was publishing Psychic News for the first time, like he wrote to Arthur Findlay, he also wrote to Harry Price, his friend at that time, to see if he would submit an article just talking about why Harry Price believed that spiritualism wasn't a religion. So there was some friendliness between them at that point. Then later on in the 1930s, Harry Price went off to the Harz Mountains in Germany to conduct an experiment. And the experiment's aim was to demonstrate that the days of sorcery were over. And this involved using a virgin, a group of magicians, a white male goat whose mouth was, and I quote, to be smeared with blood, honey, and the metal scraped from church bells. And they would get around to some incantations, and the goat was supposed to be transformed into a youth of surpassing beauty. So, of course, there was a lot of newspaper interest in this. Journalists went to watch him do this, and nothing happened, of course, not what we would expect it to. Maurice Barbanell picked on this as soon as it happened and would publish many comments about Harry Price in Psychic News, deriding him, making comments about him. One he said he was bringing up Helen Duncan again, and he wanted Harry Price to reproduce some ectoplasm he was said to have taken from Helen Duncan and gave to Hannon Swaffer. But Maurice Barbanell said, oh, maybe the goat ate it from when you were in the mountains in Germany. Of course, Harry Price, as well, similar to Maurice Barbanell, also not afraid of some, public disputes. Then they got into this bit of a battle in the pages of Psychic News about this. This did culminate in the late 1930s with a legal case between Harry Price and Maurice Barbanell in Psychic News, because Harry Price had given an interview to a Sheffield newspaper and he was denouncing mediumship and mediums, and Barbanell didn't like this, so sued him for libel, a case that didn't go anywhere in the courts because Harry Price seemingly ran off from that, and so nothing happened of that.
I was just going to say, doesn't that just show his character, though, in terms of his reactions to how he deals with it? I mean, just thinking about the response that he has for Harry Price about the cheesecloth, and maybe it was the goat, and the fact that he is prepared to stand by what he believes in and go through an entire court proceeding process to challenge something that he believes is wrong. I mean, again, I think it says a lot about his character, but also about his wit. There's something quite charming about him as well, I think.
There is, but it's also, part of me kind of finds it sad, Michelle, is that they were once friends, and now he's kind of burned some bridges in his support of spiritualism, so he wasn't afraid to lose friendships, whether it was Arthur Findlay over money or, Harry Price over, some, strange display of sorcery in the German mountains. He wasn't afraid to lose friends. He also, though, Michelle, he was not afraid to keep something going, to keep these fires burning, as we see with the Church of England. So in the 1920 Lambeth Conference, the bishops of the Church of England, they tried to address the effect of spiritualism on the Church of England. It didn't go anywhere at that time, and nothing happened for many years until the 1930s. Francis Underhill, who was the Dean of Rochester and later the Bishop of Bath and Wells, he was investigating spiritualism himself in terms of seeing mediums and experiencing having readings, and wanted to know the wider effect of spiritualism on the church. So he approached the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Cosmo Lang, to see if he would set up a formal committee to study spiritualism. Lang didn't want to have something so public, so he formed a small committee of maybe 10 or 12 people to spend a year or two investigating the effect of spiritualism on the Church of England. And bear in mind, we know from one of your other guests, Dr. Kyle Falcon, that there's a period of when there's war, people turn to spiritualism in their time of grief to get answers and keep that connection going with loved ones who died. And so the Church of England, like other organized religion, had lost people coming to them because they weren't able to address death and what happens to people after they die, especially in such tragic times of war. So this committee served, they met 12 times, they produced a report. There was a majority report and a minority report. The majority said there was something to spiritualism, but didn't really want to go into confirming what the effect that was on the church. And 3 members went against that. Even though this was secret, word had got out that this was happening. And of course, Maurice Barbanell knew this was happening. And so he spent from the 1930s to the 1970s, when the report was finally published, going against the Church of England and every Archbishop of Canterbury who served to get them to publish this report, which they would not do because they said it was a private report and was never intended to be published. Interesting that excerpts and the report was published by Psychic News at a time when Barbanell was not there, when he was not editing it, which I think is interesting, even though Barbanell claims that his greatest scoop was publishing the church's report on spiritualism. He claims to have been friends with one of the members of the committee, a Harley Street psychologist, who, although he did not give Barbanell the report, Maurice Barbanell said one day in his office he left the report on his desk for Maurice to read. Maurice claimed to have been able to remember it word by word and then republish it. So there's some confusion definitely around who was the first person to publish this report, and I'm not convinced it was Maurice Barbanell, against what he says.
If you've been enraptured by the chilling tales and enigmas unveiled throughout our podcast Spectral Journey, now's your chance to become an integral part of our ghostly congregation. You see, as we delve deeper into the mysteries of the past, we need your support now more than ever. But fear not, for there are a myriad of ways you can help keep the supernatural flames burning bright. Firstly, have you ever considered treating our podcast to a virtual coffee? Picture it, a humble offering to fuel our relentless pursuit of haunted histories. Just head over to ko-fi.com/Haunted History Chronicles and join us for a caffeine-infused seance. But that's merely the beginning of our spectral soiree. For those intrepid souls yearning for deeper communion with the paranormal, consider joining our exclusive Patreon family. From March onwards, our Patreon page will be a haven of clandestine content, with weekly podcasts and daily long and short form offerings. Yes, you heard it right. Daily doses of the supernatural, a veritable paranormal advent calendar for your soul. So why hesitate? Journey forth to patreon.com/Haunted History Chronicles and become a patron today. But wait, the spirit of generosity lingers still. If you seek to flaunt your allegiance to the Haunted History Chronicles in more tangible ways, venture into our newly unearthed merchandise crypt. From mugs that whisper their secrets to clothing that echoes with ghostly laughter, our shop is a sanctuary for the discerning paranormal aficionado. Just visit tpublic.com and traverse to the Haunted History Chronicles shop page to adorn yourself with our spectral regalia. Whether it's bestowing a virtual coffee, joining our spectral society on Patreon, or donning Haunted History Chronicles apparel, your support keeps the ethereal flames alight. Remember, every spectral contribution fuels our pursuit of unearthly truths, propelling us ever deeper into the realms of shadows and whispers. So heed the call, dear listeners. The links to our spectral sanctuaries await in the shadows of the podcast description notes, as well as our haunted haunts on social media. Dare to embrace the unknown, to journey deeper into the veiled corridors of history. For only together can we keep the ghostly embers glowing, illuminating the darkness with tales untold. Now, let us return to the mysteries that beckon from beyond the veil. What spectres await? What secrets lie dormant, waiting to be unearthed? Let us venture forth, for the journey into the unknown has only just begun. So how did Barbanell's editorship help in propagating Silver Birch's teachings? And, why are those teachings considered so significant in spiritualist philosophy?
So around 1935, Psychic News, I think it was Hen and Swaffer's suggestion that they should start publishing the teachings of Silver Birch because they were so meaningful to the Han and Swaffer home circle, of which Silver Birch and Maurice Barbanell were the leaders, if you like. So Maurice Barbanell agreed to publish the teachings as long as he could retain his anonymity. He didn't want people to know it was him. And again, like Swaffer, withdrawing financial support from founding Psychic News, Barbanell didn't want people to think he was profiting from Silver Birch's teachings. He didn't want to be seen as making money from them. So they started publishing. It could have been questions from the public to Silver Birch that were posed to him during one of the home circle seances, or it could have been, the philosophy that Silver Birch was communicating through Maurice Barbanell every Friday evening at Maurice Barbanell's home in northwest London. And I think the teachings are significant because they're foundational, I think, to spiritualism. You can read them, you learn from them, and then you can set them aside and continue your own belief system into what you believe spiritualism to be and what you have learned through your time. I think Silver Birch teachings are definitely from a time. Silver Birch did not believe in euthanasia, didn't believe in keeping people on life support. Abortion was, against his philosophy because he believed, life has a natural end date and we shouldn't be prolonging someone's life medically, which of course today we do that. And when Silver Birch was around for the first many years, that wasn't a possibility. Medicine has come a long way since then. So I'd be curious to know what Silver Birch would say today about the state of the world and life as it is.
So what contributions did Maurice make to the Spiritualist National Union?
So a lot. During the late 1920s. He was part of the propaganda committee. So that was popular in the beginning of the SNU, and then kind of went out of fashion. And then in about 1931, the SNU restarted their propaganda activities. And I know people are shocked that we use the word propaganda within spiritualism, but this is what they were doing. So Barbanell and Hanan Swaffer would travel the country in the United Kingdom over the course of 3 years. And they spoke to, as they claim, audiences of 250,000 people over those 3 years, where they would try and educate people about spiritualism, tell them what it is, what it means. Barbanell would be speaking out against the laws that were against mediums and mediumship. So he was very involved with that then. He was the vice president of the London area group for the SNU for a while. He also became a minister with the SNU before the Second World War, actually about 1928, which meant he didn't have to serve in the Second World War because he was a religious minister. And he actually wanted to become president or vice president of the SNU, but he was never voted in to do that. And he stopped his involvement officially with the SNU around the time that he founded Psychic News.
And, right at the very beginning of the podcast, we obviously spoke about Maurice's very early upbringing and his parents' role in his life, and maybe how that impacted on some of the decisions and the kind of the route that he took in life, being someone who liked to speak publicly and have these types of discourses with others. Do you want to just kind of go into maybe some of his later life and, the 2 marriages that he had and how his personal life, again, influenced his professional work?
So he married Lily Black on August the 15th, 1925. Maurice was only 23 at the time. I believe Lily was 24. They had one son, Derek, and unfortunately Lily and Maurice divorced around 6 years later. Divorce at that time would have been hard to do, so it seems that what happened was Maurice likely set this up. So a few times he was caught in a hotel room with another woman in 2 different hotels in central London. So that gave Lily, the cause to sue him for divorce because she had proof that he was committing adultery. He claimed he was a gentleman throughout the whole marriage, which makes it interesting that this was, in the divorce papers, that he was caught with another woman. What I find interesting as well, only 4 days after his divorce was finalized in the court, he married for the second time. And he married a woman called Sylvia Abrahams, who was his wife for the rest of his life. They were together until 1981, when Maurice Barbanell passed away himself. So how did this influence his professional work? With his first wife, Lily, I think this is when he would have been ostracized from the family, when his mother no longer spoke to him because he was involved in spiritualism at that time. And that's how dedicated he was to spiritualism, is that he was prepared to leave his family behind for that. He later on in life, a letter came into Psychic News from someone claiming to be his son, Roy Stemman, who opened the letter and who was working for Psychic News at the time, knocked on Barbanell's door and said, "Oh, there's a letter here. It's marked personal and confidential, but it's saying from someone who's saying they're your son, And Maurice's like, yes, that is my son. I haven't seen him for years. And they did meet for lunch. And then Roy said he never heard the son's name mentioned again, which is interesting. Sylvia, on the other hand, his second wife, she was involved in psychic news. She was an author herself. She would write about what happens when children die or when your pet dies. And she often produced articles within psychic news, often related to things like vegetarianism and animal protection and anti-cruelty to animals.
So, how did Maurice kind of balance his commercial career alongside that dedication that he had towards spiritualism before really kind of fully committing to the latter?
So I'm not sure he did balance his commercial career. I think because he was a failed businessman, he wasn't terribly good at business by all accounts, whether that was him or just the time in the early 1930s. I think spiritualism became his business, if you like. He was editor of two spiritualist newspapers for 61 years together. So that became his commercial career, if you like, keeping those alive. He did write many books. He published, 14, 15 books throughout his life. So he was able to make money that way as well from spiritualism, oftentimes repeating the same stories in his books, I have to say, which can be hard to read time and time again. And I talked about his issues with the Church of England. He also had issues with the Catholic Church. He was able to produce pamphlets and books about these challenges he had with them and made money from them.
So, what were Barbanell's views on reincarnation, and is that something that changed throughout his life?
Yep. So reincarnation, I think, is the most challenging part for spiritualists, because spiritualists in general don't believe in reincarnation. When you die, your spirit goes over, and that's how spirits communicate afterwards. So if you reincarnate, how is spirit communication happening? So Barbanell was definitely anti-reincarnation, did not believe in it because of his spiritualistic beliefs. And I think those evolved over time with his work with silver birch, and I think we can describe it this way, and this is how a friend of mine described it to me. When you pass over, when you leave your physical body, your soul passes over, but a little piece of you can reincarnate. So it's not the whole of you, it's just a piece of you that will come back into the earth. So which allows, you might say, oh, my son Joe has these characteristics that are just like Grandpa John. So it's just that little bit of Grandpa John that's come through. And I think this just shows that with spiritualism, you can change your view. You're not expected to believe the same thing throughout the whole of your life. You can and you should grow with the religion that you're following.
So, how did Barbanell approach mediumship and trance communication? Did he have any particular methodologies that he believed in and approaches that he kind of took to his craft?
So these aren't entirely clear through everything I've read about Barbanell, but I know that he was aware that there were doubts that people had about the veracity of mediumship, including his own. Yet Maurice was adamant that Silver Birch was not, as some people would say, a secondary personality. He knew that his spirit guide had a complete individuality of his own, but knew that because mediumship is performed by human beings, it's always possible that those messages from spirit could be colored by the mind of the medium. And I think for Barbanell, how he approached mediumship, that it was time that made him better. At the beginning, he was very aware of what was happening. He said he would often lie in bed, and it was almost like watching a movie of the messages or the philosophy that he delivered from Silver Birch. And then the more he did it, the more he was able to remove his ego from the equation and distance himself from the message and not be aware of what he said afterwards. And this is quite common with mediums if you talk to them now, is that most mediums, when they deliver messages afterwards, they don't remember what they've said. They don't remember who came through, who they spoke to, because they've removed themselves completely from their mind, if you like, so that the message is not coming from their subconscious, but it's coming from the spirit guide that they're channeling.
So, What were Barbanell's views on the authenticity and ethics of mediumship, particularly regarding the portrayal of racialized identities in seances?
So this is a great question. So Silver Birch, as we know, presented as Indigenous American. And the story changes through the early years, where he says he's Indigenous American, then he's not, then he is, then he's not. So it's quite confusing. And even Hannon Swaffer wrote about this in one of his books, that at the beginning, Silver Birch came through, and the English he used was not easy to follow, but yet over the years his English improved and was, very easy to understand. And I think with Barbanell and Silver Birch, and this is a common belief among spiritualists of their time, is that Indigenous Americans would present themselves as spirit guides because people were more likely to believe what was being said because of this stereotype and trope of the Native Americans being, lovers of nature and spiritual people themselves. So I think it is problematic. I think we can argue that this is, appropriation of another culture with these spirit guides portraying themselves in a particular way. It's interesting how the UK, the mediums, a lot of them, their spirit guides were either from the Middle East or from India, or from countries that have been colonized by the United Kingdom over time. So I think it's a highly problematic area of mediumship. And I talk about this in my dissertation, in the language that's used, and it's almost the accents that are used. There's a mimicry of the spirit guides and who they're portraying as a race in the seance room.
So, how do you think Maurice Barbanell his contributions have shaped spiritualism? What would you say his impact has been?
So I think his impact has been immense. If nowadays it's seen as behind the scenes, he certainly doesn't have, isn't spoken about like other propagandists of spiritualism, which I think is sad, which is why I, chose him as a topic for my dissertation. And I think, as we've talked about throughout this podcast, Michelle, because he wasn't afraid to speak out, and he did speak out in favor of spiritualism and against spiritualism when there were fraudulent mediums he was, uncovering. So I would like to think that he has influenced spiritualism today. We just don't know it's his influence because he's not been spoken about for so many years.
And what would you say his legacy is? How is that reflected in terms of maybe the ongoing influence of psychic news, maybe, and Silver Birch's teachings?
So the legacy is significant just because psychic news is still being published to this day. Yes, there were periods of shaky ground for psychic news when it wasn't published, and issues of ownership and what have you. And so I think the fact that that's still being published is very significant for Maurice Barbanell and his legacy. In terms of Silver Birch's teachings, yes, they are still spoken about in spiritualist churches. But of course, it's those teachings that resonate with the medium or the speaker who's giving the talk in the church that day. I just wish that more was spoken about Maurice Barbanell himself and not just Silver Birch.
So, how do you see maybe Barbanell's work being remembered and honoured within the spiritualist community today?
So sadly, I don't think it is, Michelle. There is the Barbanell Centre in the UK that is part of the SNU, and the Art of Findlay College is another kind of conference type centre there that's named after him, which is great. And of course, as we've just said, psychic news continues, but I think we could do a better job in remembering Maurice Barbanell. He was spoken about on YouTube by the president of the SNU a few years ago, Tony Watson, who worked with Barbanell and is the current editor of Psychic News. So they did speak about Barbanell. But otherwise, I think he's been too easily forgotten compared to others who went before him, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Oliver Lodge, who are still spoken about more than Barbanell.
And, I think that's the real shame, that there are so many people for whom their contribution, their legacy, their life's work is maybe in the background. They are the shadows of the story. You know less about them, if you like. And I think it's fantastic that we can have these types of discussions around someone to raise their profile and what they did, the amount of things that he did in his lifetime, the amount of decades he dedicated to spiritualism deserves to be remembered. And I think it's incredible that you spent your time writing about him for your dissertation, wanting to share his story. And I know you have plans in the future to obviously do more on that. And I don't know if you want to kind of share some of what your next steps are when it comes to what you're planning to do next when kind of talking about and sharing what you've learned about Maurice's life.
Sure. And thanks to you, Michelle, for giving us this platform to talk about characters such as Maurice Barbanell. This is fantastic. So I've condensed 4 years of research into an hour conversation with you from my dissertation. And now my plan is to turn that into a book. So we can publish that. And I can include parts of Maurice's life in there, such as some traveling he did I found interesting. Sailing first class on a ship from New York to the Caribbean. Which isn't really an academic dissertation topic, but I think it's fascinating for a book for those who want to know more about Barbanell the man. And I want to be able to illustrate it more. I did include about 10 to 15 images in my dissertation just to highlight some of the characters and events that I write about, but I want to be able to add more to that and make it more visually appealing to everyone, and that it's not just an academic text, but it's more accessible by anyone who wants to learn more about it.
So what do you think was his most significant achievement in his lifetime?
It has to be the founding of Psychic News. Something that, as I talked about, he didn't jump at the chance to do it. He saw, 3 different mediums, had 3 different sittings to be sure it was the right path for him. And it was, because, even up to his last day, in July 1981, when he died, he was still editing Psychic News on his deathbed. He'd been away on vacation and come back and was unwell for a short while and was literally in bed on a Friday, I think it was, finishing up the latest edition of Psychic News when he passed away. Psychic News has to be his most significant achievement.
And are there any misconceptions or lesser known facts about him that you would like to clarify or to highlight?
I think, yes, he was antagonistic, but he did it for a reason, and he believed in that reason, and I respect him for sticking to his guns, if you like. There was one time, Michelle, I didn't talk about, he was attacked by the wife of a medium he'd accused of being fraudulent with a horsewhip in the street. He was physically beaten for the work he was doing that people don't know about. And I think he was a good man, a private man. He clearly loved his wife. They were together for many years, and they had a great partnership in that sense. Sylvia sat with him during every seance next to him as he took his glasses off and went into trance. And I just think I would love to have met Maurice Barbanell and had a conversation with him.
So just to kind of bring things together, what would you say maybe are some of the lessons that contemporary spiritualists could learn from Barbanell's life and his work?
So I think we learn that you can evolve in your thinking, that you don't have to stick to the same thought in 10 years' time that you had today. As we see, he evolved in his thinking, and as we talked about with reincarnation. And I think it's speaking up. It's, spiritualism is derided. People do look down on it because they don't believe it. And so I think, we have to advocate for what we believe in. Especially as spiritualist churches, the population or the popularity is decreasing, churches are closing. So we could learn from Barbanell to ensure that this doesn't happen and that spiritualism as a religion keeps going.
Honestly, it's been such a privilege to chat with you and to go into more depth about Maurice's life, because he is so fascinating and the dedication he had for spiritualism is really rather remarkable. He is a remarkable figure, and like so many figures, so many people who are in the background, it's amazing when you can have that opportunity to speak to someone who has dedicated a portion of their life to finding out more about them and researching them and raising their profile. So thank you so much for giving up your time to come and chat with me. Honestly, it's been such a privilege to chat with you and find out more about him.
My absolute pleasure, Michelle. It's been great to talk to someone interested in Maurice Barbanell. As you know, I've been sat with him on my own for many years. So to be able to share, these little bits I've been able to learn about him with you and your listeners has been amazing. I really appreciate it.
And I will make sure to include in the podcast description notes, as well as on the website, links to yourself, information about yourself, if you like, so that people can follow along, so they can keep updated about what you're doing in terms of this book hopefully coming out, and just obviously being able to see what you're up to in terms of your profile, etc. And I'd obviously love to have you come back on the podcast again in the future, hopefully, to talk about other individuals that, again, I think deserve to have their stories also shared with people, because, like we've kind of alluded to in this podcast, there are so many people part of this field for whom we don't know enough about them. They are not spoken about enough, and I think that's a shame. So, as I said, I hope you come back on to share your insights about other personalities in the future.
I will, for sure. I look forward to the invitation.
Honestly, thank you so much for your time, and I will say goodbye to everybody listening. Bye, everybody.